In this video I'm going to make puff pastry. It's a bit quicker than flaky pastry, but it ends up with a very similar result, lots of layers of pastry with expanded air in between and nice and flaky. Okay, so what I've got here are 200 grams of plain flour, but strong plain flour this time. You could use soft plain flour. It has slightly less protein in it than strong plain flour, but it will work just as well. The strong plain flour, which is bread flour I tend to use, tends to just give a extra stretch to your dough because of the extra protein that it has in it. Okay, now when the protein in the flour becomes wet, so once you add the water, it starts to form gluten, okay, and that is what gives you your stretchy elasticity to your dough. So the more stretchy the dough is, the better really, because this dough, you'll see as we go on, has a lot of rolling and folding and stretching involved. Okay, so we've sieved 200 grams of flour, okay, and to that we're now using 3/4 or 2/3 fat to flour. So what we're using is 200 grams of flour and 75 grams of butter and 75 grams of white fat. Now you could use all butter, block butter, and use 150 grams. So it's 2/3 fat to flour, or it's a ratio of 200 grams flour to 150, so it's 4 to 3, so it's 3/4 fat to flour. Okay, so it's a 4 of flour, 3 of fat ratio. Okay, so if you can learn your ratios, you can work out your recipes from there for pastry, and then this can be made into plats, sausage rolls, vol au vents, pasties, turnovers, those sorts of things. It's very good as a plat, nice sort of pastry for a dessert, okay, as well. So what we're doing is actually breaking the fat up like we did with short crust pastry, okay, but we're not going to rub it in this time. So the fat gets broken up. Break it up in a bowl. There's a lot more fat in this, so in terms of pastry and healthy, short crust pastry, because it's got less fat in it, is a healthier pastry, okay, compared with this, because this has got a lot more fat in it, okay, but the fat is there for a reason, and that will become evident as we go on. So what we do is we put that in, so make a well in your flour. You can add a pinch of salt to this if you want to, but don't add too much salt because that can actually affect the gluten formation. So too much salt will actually affect how well your protein strands develop, and we don't want those to be affected on this pastry. So what you're doing at this point, okay, is giving that a good stir and break into the flour, but we're not rubbing in. Okay, so we've just got it in chunks in there. All right, and it seems a very strange pastry to make because we're used to rubbing things in and then adding the liquid, whereas now we're not. We're actually keeping those chunks of fat. So we want the fat to be dispersed within the pastry, but allow it to actually evaporate off in the oven, the moisture, evaporate water off, and then steam will then cause the layers of pastry to rise. Now for the liquid, we're going to use cold water that's been chilling in the fridge, and the proportion of water to use for puff pastry is 20 mils per 25 grams of flour. So 20 mils per 25 grams of flour is 1 tablespoon per 25 grams of flour. For this recipe, that would then be 8 tablespoons of water. What I generally do is actually add a little bit of lemon juice to the water because that helps to develop the stretchiness of the gluten. So just a couple of drops of maybe sort of half a teaspoon of lemon juice, give that a stir, and then you need your palette knife to stir the liquid into your pastry. Okay, so we've got 8 tablespoons in total. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't add your liquid all at once. Give that a stir. Okay, now we have not rubbed the fat into the flour. If you notice, it's still in big chunks. Okay, then add more water, so I'm adding another 2. Again, the absorbency of your flour on the day that you're baking will vary, so that basically if you've got a wet, moist conditions, you'll need less flour. If you've actually got a nice dry day, you'll need lots of water. So the drier the conditions, the more water you'll need, and the more moist and humid the atmosphere is around you, and if you've got a really well heated, the more humid it is, the less liquid you'll need to use. Okay, so that's going, there's the last 2 going in, so we'll see what that's like. Okay, give that a really good stir. If you notice, I'm using the palette knife again because I'm keeping everything cold, cutting it into the dough. Okay, so I'm still keeping those lumps. Pull that off the knife, put your hands in, pull it together. If it seems a bit dry, you can add a tiny bit more liquid, but not too much. Okay, so just add a little dribble more. Pull that together. And this dough is very fatty, just a tiny bit more water. To be very careful, because you don't want it really sloppy, you want it just pulling together nicely. And again, it should be the same as short crust pastry, where you actually just use the dough itself to pull it off the bowl. Okay, get it out of the way. Get the bowl nice and clear of the dough. Okay, so that's the ball of dough, but we're not finished here. We've actually got several stages to go, because now what you do, just remove that, you need to dust your work surface with flour. Okay, dust the pastry and the flour, and then you need to view this as a rectangle. Okay, so just see it as a rectangle, and we work from there. Okay, on a nice dusted floured surface. You'll find it easier to deal with the pastry if you've got clean hands, so wash the dough off your hands. Okay, and then you're dusting with flour, and you need a rolling pin. Just make sure when you're working with this pastry that you've got flour on your worktop, not too much. Okay, and you flour your rolling pin as well, because you will find that fat, as you're rolling this out, will actually start to come through and stick to the rolling pin. Okay, so we've still got chunks of fat, and you'll see those as I roll. So I'm going to press it out, have it in a rectangular shape, roll from the middle up, roll from the middle down. Use your hands to keep a nice shape. Okay, you want it almost the length of the rolling pin. Okay, so that's that. So that's your first roll. So, palette knife, just in case you need it, to scrape your work surface or scrape your rolling pin so that you don't have anything sticking to it. Now, what we're doing is taking, if you imagine this as thirds, you bring the bottom third up over the centre third, top third over the centre third. Okay, press down each side, press the bottom. Okay, because you're sealing in the air, because you're getting nice layers in now, and that's the whole point of this stage. Okay, just keep moving your dough, lifting it, making sure it's not sticking, etc. So that's as I folded it, and I've sealed it to squash it, stop the air from escaping. And then we do a quarter turn. So we turn the same way all the time. I tend to turn clockwise, so I remember the numbers on a clock and I follow them around. Okay, so flour on your work, on your rolling pin. Okay, again, tap down in the middle first, then you roll up from the middle and down from the middle. Okay, you can see it's starting to stick, so keep your rolling pin clean and clear. Okay, and you can put a little bit of flour on the top of your pastry. So again, you're rolling it out, trying to keep it rectangular. Don't worry about little bits of fat that are coming out of it, because that's perfectly normal. Okay, so we keep rolling. Okay, so this is why we needed to develop the stretchiness of your protein. So that's why we haven't rubbed in the fat to the flour. Okay, when we're rolling, okay, again, so this is the second roll and fold. So second fold, up again, down again. So straight onto the middle, seal the edges. Okay, I tend to seal in the middle as well because it squashes the air towards the edges, but because it's already sealed on the outside, it's not going to escape. Then lift, scrape your worktop so that you're not getting bits of fat stuck to it, okay, because that will just cause your pastry to stick to everything. And then redust with flour. And you, again, put it down where you started, take a quarter turn, okay? And dust your flour onto your rolling pin as well. So dab in the middle, okay? Roll from the middle up, roll from the middle down, okay? Nice even weight distribution across that rolling pin will actually keep the thickness of your pastry, okay, fairly even. Now what we're doing is we're compressing, we're layering and compressing. By rolling, we're compressing the layers together, but they are forming all the time, okay? If the fat eventually will mix in, and that fat, when the pastry cooks, will melt, turn to steam. The water within the fat will turn to steam. That will then evaporate off and it will push the layers of pastry apart, and that gives you your distinctive layers within the cooked dish. Okay, so we are rolling again. So you're looking for a rectangular shape, nearly as long as your rolling pin. Keep it nice and shaped with your hands. Bottom third over the centre third, top third over the centre third. Seal it, squash it down gently. Okay, lift, scrape your worktop. You notice that everything I'm scraping, I'm pulling to one side out of the way so that it doesn't get caught and stuck to the pastry. Then I use another fresh dusting of flour. Okay. So when we were forming this pastry, we didn't rub the fat into the flour, so we're rolling again. Okay, so squash gently and then roll from the middle up, middle down. So when we're making this pastry, we didn't rub the fat into the flour. If we rub the fat into the flour, that means that the fat molecules surround the flour particles and stop the water, some of the water, from getting to the protein so that it can form gluten. And gluten is the stretchy protein that we want to develop in this puff pastry. Okay, so it's important that we don't rub the fat in. That's why we put it in chunks, and it's absorbing gradually the more we roll and fold. Okay, so it's allowed, by doing that, by stirring it in chunks and adding the water, more water has got to the flour particles to hydrate the protein, to make glutenin and gliadin join together to form gluten, which now develops that stretchy elastic dough that you can see now. Okay, so we bring that bottom third over the centre third again, top third over the centre third, seal it again. Okay, that's about 3 that we've done now. I would say to get good lamination, you want to do, I'd say on average, about 5 rolls. Okay, 5 rolls and folds, because if you're going to store it in the fridge to use later, or if you're going to freeze it and then use it later, you will then roll and fold again before using it. So that would be another 2 rolls on top of that. Okay, so again, flour underneath, you then quarter turn it, same direction all the time, gently compress it, okay, and then roll from the center up, roll from the center down, and you just do that repeatedly until you've ended up with it at the right length. Keep it moving. You want to make sure it's not sticking. Okay, dust with flour if it is starting to stick. Make sure it's not. Okay, so we're going to stop at this point and package it for storage. So I'm going to bring that bottom third up, top third down, seal the edges. Okay, just squash the air out a little bit in the middle, disperse it. Okay, and then I'm going to just dust that with some flour so that it doesn't stick to the bag. So I'm going to store that in a bag ready for when I want to use it. It will store in the fridge for about 2 to 3 days, made fresh, or you can freeze it and it will store in the freezer for a couple of months. But if you're defrosting it from the freezer, you defrost it in the fridge. You don't defrost it by putting it in the microwave because that will melt all the fat out. Okay, so that is your rough puff pastry. So we've got that nice lamination. That's what we're trying to get all the time, is all these layers. Okay, now I would do that again now twice more after chilling. So at this point you always relax pastry. Now ideally for puff pastry or flaky pastry, to relax in between each roll and fold is quite useful, but quite often we don't have enough time for that when we're baking. So what you would do is make it like I have, seal it up, label it as rough puff pastry, put the date on it that you made it so that you know how long you can store it for, and then you can actually then put it to one side and it would chill then. So I would chill that before using it and then do another roll and fold before, because to use pastry straight from the fridge is not ideal.